Hello there, Slayer, CabooseDOTexe with another Killing Floor 2 weapon guide and review. Today's weapon is going to be the Mosin Nagant, or as I like to call it, the Moist Nugget, or the Moist Nougat. We're going to start with the basic stats. Then we'll be going in depth and covering everything about the Mosin stats before talking about how the weapon compares to its competition. Then I'll talk about how skills affect the weapon and what skills you should use. Keep in mind these skills are more or less about just the Mosin and not about a specific loadout. Then we can talk about some strategies that you can use with the Mosin. I might even give you a loadout that you can try. And finally, we'll end with my personal opinion. Alright, enough with this introduction, let's dive in! The Mosin Nagant is a Tier 3 Sharpshooter DLC weapon added during the 2019 winter event called Yuletime Horrors. The weapon is accessible to anyone who has purchased or is playing with someone who has purchased the weapon from the in-game store. The incentive to purchasing it is that you get 5 exclusive skins. The first one is the winter skin, like a winter camouflage. Then we have the black filigree skin, which is pretty nice. Then we have the red filigree skin, which I think looks even better than the previous. Then we have the camouflage, which is pretty standard stuff. Then finally, we have my personal favorite, the green one, which is really nice. It got this corporal logo and a quote from Mr. Foster on it. The Mosin weighs in at 7 units and has a maximum capacity of 5 rounds, which is fed all at once using a clip. Your base ammo is 60, which can be increased to 75 with the level 20 sharpshooter skill always prepared. The Mosin costs 1100 dosh, and the ammo costs 42 per clip, which is way more than it would cost in real life. Mosin Nagant's special ability is the bayonet that's attached to it. It allows you to do more melee damage as a sharpshooter, which comes really handy when you get yourself in trouble. When you find yourself backed into a corner, that bayonet is a lifesaver. Bayonet of the gun is now part melee weapon like Squall's Gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII. You are able to block and parry. The damage mitigation is the standard 40-50. So that's 40% damage reduction for blocking and 50% reduction for a successful parry. The flavor text does not lie when it tells you that the gun specializes in stabbing, shooting, and stab shooting. So let's move on to the damage. The Mosin's base damage is 250 per shot, and the bayonet's stab does 100. A lot better than the 25 to 30 that most weapons have with their bash. The exception, of course, being the compound bow, which also has a bayonet. Being a tier 3 weapon allows you to upgrade the weapon twice. The first upgrade increases the base damage by 1.15, and the second one increases the base damage by 1.3. So every time you get an upgrade, your damage increases by 15%. So let's bust out those charts. There's going to be a lot of them, so stick with me. I actually put a poll up just to see how many of you want to see every damage chart available. Now, even though there are only 31 combinations possible, which in itself is a lot, thanks to Rack 'em Up increasing by 10% from 10% to 50%, I have to put in 5 charts every time you see Rack 'em Up. On top of that, double the amount because every skill also affects the bayonet. However, the bayonet cannot activate Rack 'em Up. You have to shoot them in the head in order to increase the percentage. Just so you know, I won't be giving a lot of input here. I'm just going to hold every chart on screen for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then you can pause if you want to see it longer. If I were to go in depth with every chart, we're going to be here for hours. I'd like to try to get these videos within 20 minutes, just so that way you don't have to, be here for longer than that just to hear about one weapon. Alright, let's get started here. On the left is the damage for the shot, and the right's the damage for the bayonet. This is just the base sharpshooter perk without any of the damage skills. Every chart from here on out will include this. So here we have the damage with the sniper skill, and here's the damage with the stability skill. Here's the chart for Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Here's Deadeye, and here's Assassin. Alright, let's mix it up! Be ready to pause, because there's about 25 combinations headed your way. If you want to take a look later on, a link to the Google Sheet will be in the description. That's where I put all my charts. So here's Sniper and Stability. Here's Sniper and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Here's Sniper and Deadeye, Sniper and Assassin. Then we have Stability and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Here's Stability and Deadeye. Next is Stability and Assassin. Then we have Deadeye and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Then we have Assassin and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Next up is Deadeye and Assassin. Then we have Sniper Stability and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Then we have Sniper Stability and Deadeye, followed by Sniper Stability and Assassin. Wrapping it around, we have Sniper, Deadeye, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Then there's Sniper, Assassin, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Next is Sniper, Deadeye, and Assassin, followed by Stability, Deadeye, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. And here's Stability, Assassin, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Here's Deadeye, Assassin, Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Then Sniper, Stability, Deadeye, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Followed by Sniper, Stability, Assassin, Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Then Sniper, Deadeye, Assassin, Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. Almost there. Stick with me here. We have Sniper, Stability, Deadeye, and Assassin. Then Stability, Deadeye, Assassin, and Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. And finally, the entire left side with Rack 'em Up at 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. That's a lot of damage. Look at all that damage. That is the kind of damage I want. My God, that's a lot of charts. I'm glad to be done with that section. Honestly, that part took probably more time to edit than the rest of this review. Just so you know, you can find all these charts in the description. It'll be a Google Sheet. Now, damage is what Sharpshooter is meant to do, and the Mosin is no real exception. It beats out a lot of the other rifles in single-shot damage, but not necessarily in DPS. The Mosin's rate of fire is 70 RPM and 74 SPM for the bayonet. That's stabs per minute. Now, while its melee does beat out every other rifle, its firing rate does not. When it comes to firing rate, the Mosin loses to the centerfire, the M14, and the FN FAL. That failure of a sharpshooter weapon, go back to commando. Because of this RPM, the M14 beats out the Mosin in DPS. So would the centerfire if it wasn't for its reload speed. The FN FAL also beats out the Mosin. So the question then is, do you want one bullet to do a lot of damage, or do you want to spread it out? For this reason, I recommend taking the Mosin with something that has a faster firing rate. Now, something that's important to Sharpshooter is penetration. This allows you to get multiple headshots, and when your gun only holds 5 rounds, you're gonna need it. The penetration for the Mosin is 3, which for Sharpshooter puts you above the centerfire, M14, and FN FAL, but just one shy of the crossbow. Not to worry though, this means that the only thing you can't shoot through are the tankiest of enemies, which are bloats, scrakes, pounders, and bosses. You can still go through husks, so you might be able to blow them up by shooting through that body if that shot doesn't just kill them. Moving on to the reload speed, we have a weird delay. Yeah, there's like a half-second delay, but that's not all. Because you use a clip to reload, something interesting happens. When reloading a completely empty Mosin, it'll take 2.78 seconds, and with a tactical reload skill, it'll take 2.08 seconds. Standard stuff, right? But reloading before the gun is empty lands you 2.38 second reload unless there's 1 round left in the gun. Then it's a 2.33 second reload. Oh, what a big difference, Caboose. Why'd you even bother? This is supposed to be a complete review, so I had to mention it. Yeah, I really don't know why I made a big deal about that. Anyway, with tactical reload, both of these times are overwritten for a 1.93 second reload, which is even faster when paired with stability, granting you a 20% faster reload speed while crouching. If my calculations are correct, this allows you to reach a reload speed of about 1.32 seconds. And it is a noticeable difference. It is a hugely noticeable difference. So what about that block and parry? Well, it only works on bludgeon and slashing, so don't go trying to stop missiles with it. As for the parry, the duration is 0.44 seconds, which is on par with the Bone Crusher. As for the parry strength, well, that's going to be a 4, which puts you on par with the Katana, Road Redeemer, and the Fire Axe. Now, remember when I said to pair the Mosin with a weapon with a faster firing rate? Well, it's one of the slower ones to equip, taking 0.69 seconds to equip and 0.73 seconds to take out. And finally, for stats, we have the weapon power values. The bayonet's melee hit power is 150, which works well on Gorefasts and Sirens. As for the bullet, the gun hit power is also 150. The knockdown power is 30, so not so great. Stumble is 50 and stun is 40. Now comparing these to that of the M14, the Mosin wins in every category. By quite a bit too. Surprisingly though, the centerfire beats the Mosin in stumble power. Whew! Man, that was hard to get through. I have to think of a better system to get through those charts. Because every time I do a sharpshooter, I'm going to have to go through that gauntlet of naming every chart. Maybe I'll just take the audio and play that every time. I don't know. You guys tell me how you would like me to do that section. Anyway, now that we got all that stats out of the way, it's time to get into the recommendations. So let's take a look at the skills. Right off the bat, I want to say I tend to go for a lot of damage-related skills. However, this depends on the map you're playing on and what works best for you. Maybe you need more mobility. Personally, I see the Mosin as more of a camping and holding out weapon. If you're looking for something with more mobility, the M14 may be more up your alley. First, for our level 5 skill, we have Sniper and Marksman. So as I just said, it can depend. If you find yourself staying still, Sniper would be the better option. But I find that Killing Floor 2's gameplay favors mobility over holding out like in Killing Floor 1. This is something I'd like to discuss in a future video, and if I've finished it, you'll find it in the description. I'll make it obvious for you. As I've mentioned previously, the Mosin is great single shot damage, but lacks in firing rate. This lowers your overall DPS, a problem that's only exacerbated by having only 5 rounds and a slower reload speed than the M14. Not only is it slower, but you'll be doing it a lot, so if you find that you are moving a lot, then don't even think about Sniper. Go for Marksman instead. Mosin has damage, and as you've seen in my charts, you can always grab something else. Next, for our level 10 skills, we have Stability and Ballistic Shock. Personally, I go for Stability. Stun power can be nice, but that reload speed can come in real handy when you'll be doing it a lot. Now for the harder pick. The level 15 skills, Rack 'em Up and Tactical Reload. Personally, I think Tactical Reload is for me. It's a noticeable difference, especially when combined with that 20% from Stability. But if you can land headshots right after another on a moving target constantly, then Rack 'em Up is for you. However, you have to be a crack shot, because you have to cock the rifle after every shot. You'll find that keeping a combo going isn't easy as it is with the centerfire, M14, or even the FN FAL. Can't believe I found a compliment for this thing. For Sharpshooter, nonetheless. Like seriously, am I the only one that hates this weapon? If I'm the only one, I'll shut up and I won't, until we actually do a review for it. Due to how often you'll be reloading and how difficult it can be to get even a 40% when facing large Zeds, I feel that Tactical Reload wins here. You have to remember that when you play online, other players may kill the weaker Zeds that you could be using to buff up your Rack 'em Up. You'll have to resort to parrying and reloading while the Zed is dazed to fight them back. Rack 'em Up would only be really useful if you get a bunch of headshots with, say, an M14, then switch to a Mosin Nagant. Now you might be thinking, Caboose, why not just use the bayonet to trigger the damage boost from Rack 'em Up? It gets the damage, so it's gotta trigger it, right? Nope. Sadly, you cannot just stab Zeds to get that extra 10%. You have to shoot them in the head. If you're gonna go with Rack 'em Up, you're gonna need something that's gonna speed up that firing rate. Because the window of opportunity you have in order to get consecutive headshots isn't that much when you have to constantly cock your weapon after every shot. It's a great skill to use on a weapon that has a high firing rate, and sadly the Mosin does not. Being able to fire at most 5 shots before having to reload, coupled with the fact that you have to cock after every shot, is really slowing you down. I find myself trying to find ways to speed that up, just so that way I can keep myself in the battle. And if you're playing in a public match, then you might as well just forget about it, because you're going to have teammates that are constantly going after the Zeds that you're focusing on. Now, if you have an M14 as your secondary weapon, that's a different story. I can see rack 'em up being a very viable option for that. Personally, though, I still go with tactical reload. I just like having a fast reload, and you have other options for extra damage. Moving on to our level 20 skills, Deadeye and Always Prepared. I cast my vote for Deadeye for a very simple reason. 90% of the time when I play with the Mosin, I never run out of ammo. Having 15 more rounds is nice, but I find it rare that I'll be running empty on the Mosin. I mean, if you're running a second weapon that can eat through rounds like the M14 and FN FAL, then consider Always Prepared. But because of the firing rate and the amount of time I spend reloading and cocking my weapon, the wave usually ends with me holding 20 unfired rounds. Not to mention, you have a bayonet! It's great against clots, crawlers, and stalkers. Anyway, let's finish up the skills with our level 25 Z-Time ones, Assassin and Ranger. And boy, is it an easy choice. Go with Assassin. Why? Because do you really think you're going to get more than one shot off with this thing during Z-Time? Keep in mind, unless specified, I'm looking for skills that are meant for the Mosin, not a build for Sharpshooter that includes the Mosin. Ranger may be good for the M14 and FN FAL, but not for anything that's basically only going to get one shot off. You might as well make that one shot do some real damage, because 35% is a lot. That's more than half the damage you can do with rack 'em up. Okay, so how do you use this bad boy? What is the strategy? Well, if you want to be really efficient, spend some time as a berserker and get really good at parrying. The bayonet is great against smaller enemies. It'll kill clots, stalkers, and crawlers in one hit, but Gorefests will take at least 2. I find it to be a nice gun for more open maps, something that you'll only really see on custom maps. I find that it works best when paired with the M14. The M14 acts as your small Zed killer, and the Mosin you bust out for those bloats and above. The Mosin is great for hunkering down. If you and your team have to or want to hold a single area, then you find a good spot, crouch, aim down your iron sights, and start popping heads. I don't recommend the Mosin for anything higher than hard. Suicidal is possible, but for Hell on Earth, I would not recommend it. Now, a strange piece of advice that I can offer you is that it's good to leave iron sights in between shots. While you're cocking, the animation takes up 75% of your screen when you're looking down sights, so it kind of obscures your vision. Now, this could just be my ADHD acting up, but I found it easier to figure out what's going on when I do this. The last piece of strategy advice I can really give you is grow accustomed to that bayonet's range. The bayonet has a 2.5 meter range, which is dramatically greater than the regular bash of most weapons. This allows you to stab crawlers before they even make their jump. You can even stop a Gorefast and Gorfiend from charging right at you by stabbing them. This gives you a small window of opportunity to just quickly pop them in the head. So what are my personal thoughts on the weapon? I think it can be a fun gun. That is when I'm not reloading. Bringing this thing to a custom map that's long range is actually a bad idea, believe it or not. I'm not too fond of the iron sights, and apparently neither is one of the members of Tripwire that I talked to at PAX East. He really wanted a scope like in Red Orchestra. Base Killing Floor 2 doesn't have that many long-ranged areas. It makes it hard to even play Sharpshooter, let alone be stationary, which is what this weapon is best at. Hell, they added the compound bow to give Sharpshooter more run and gun capabilities. Do I like the Mosin? Yes, I think it's a lot of fun, but that might only be because it's a World War II gun to add to the collection. I do enjoy it, but for practicality reasons, I think that comes down to who is using it. It might just not fit my playstyle. I like Gunslinger. The bayonet is something I'd like to see more of for Sharpshooter, and that remains the best part of the Mosin for me. Being able to block and parry, as well as have a little nice good range when it comes to my stabs, so I can stab crawlers from a little further away, is pretty nice. I think the best way I can sum up my thoughts is this. I like the Mosin, and it has replaced the centerfire for me, but I still somewhat prefer the M14. The M14 is better for crowd control, and it can be hard to rely solely on your teammates to keep you safe. That is, while you enrage the fleshbound that is currently approaching your location. I think the Mosin might need a slight rework. Maybe a bit more damage, just something to compensate for the reloads and firing rate. However, the more I think about it, it might just be perfectly balanced, and just not the best in my hands. To kind of help me get over my biasness for the Mosin, I decided to take my way to Reddit. Just basically go and ask the community what they think of the Mosin. Overall, people basically said this: while the Mosin has its uses, it is constantly outshined by other weapons. Basically, there are two ways to play Sharpshooter. You either play Sharpshooter as a one-shot, so basically using a gun that can instantly kill most enemies. Your M99s, your railguns, I guess your compound bows, something that's able of doing a lot of damage in one shot. Or have a precision weapon that has a high firing rate. This is where you would use your M14 and your centerfire. The issue is, the Mosin is too much of a middle ground. The Mosin finds itself in a really bad spot. It does a lot of single shot damage, yes, but not enough to warrant it over anything else. For this reason, I don't really think the Mosin is worth buying, at least not at the price that it's at. Having weapons that are a bit too balanced or find themselves in a middle ground like this weapon does is okay. It's bound to happen. Especially since Tripwire doesn't want to make weapons that players feel like they need to own in order to keep up with others, which is respectable. Think of Payday 2, a game that has an insane amount of DLC and just a massive arsenal. I think Payday 2 has the biggest arsenal of any game I've ever played. But because of this, you end up having a lot of weapons that you will never touch. And honestly, that's okay. You're gonna have a few hit and misses here and there. Would I like the Mosin to be more viable? Of course, and I think that maybe they might balance it sometime in the future. But for now, as of this video's release, I don't know if it's worth getting for the price it currently is. A weapon is only worth getting if it's fun and feels like you would actually use it. If you're never going to use the weapon, then why bother? But I do think that running a Mosin with an M14 might be your best bet for the weapon. That's my 2 cents on this. Alright, now I think this video has gone on long enough, don't you think? Alright, so we're going to have to end it right here. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments what weapon you would like to see next, as well as what your thoughts are on the Mosin. If you want to see more Killing Floor 2 content, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified whenever those videos come out. I am planning on doing something a little different for my next Killing Floor 2 video, at least one that isn't just a news update or how to get the seasonal skin. I'd like to talk about how I feel about Sharpshooter, and I want to know your input on it, as well as Survivalist. I feel as though there's something about Sharpshooter that I really need to get off my chest. Running what else I do besides Killing Floor, I also try to do some Payday 2 as well as Doom related videos, and I do have a series where I talk about some forgotten games that I'm working on. This video just took me a lot longer than before because I haven't done a Sharpshooter weapon and I didn't realize just how much work I'm going to have to put into damage. For the release of the Mosin Nagant, Sharpshooter was my least played perk, even less than Survivalist. I know that doesn't say much nowadays because people are starting to come around to that skill, but I haven't messed with that one that much either. So I had to overcome that hurdle first before I could really dive deep into this weapon. And the decisiveness I felt with the Mosin kind of dragged everything out. I didn't want to put out misinformation, and I wasn't sure if I liked the weapon because I paid for it and I'm trying to justify it, or if it's because it's actually good. Because the first wave of DLC weapons, the Rhino and the Ion Thruster, I actually did enjoy them despite the price I had to pay to play with them. However, all the weapons that came out after those, I was a little bit more indecisive about. So it took a little bit of time just to figure out, do I really like the Mosin? Or is it just because it's a World War II weapon and I paid for it? I'm just trying to justify a bad purchase. I didn't want to tell you guys something that I might change my mind on later on, but I basically have all my feelings down now for all the paid DLC weapons. So whichever weapon you want to see next, just let me know in the comments and it should be out, probably within this month. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. I hope to see you guys soon. Please stay safe out there in these tough and crazy times, and remember, I love you!